Nō mai, haere mai, welcome. I'm Bruce Munro, and with me is International Relations Specialist Professor Robert Patman, and this is Global Insight. The attack on Iran's political and military leadership is entering its fifth day. Is this just one more US-led Middle East conflict, or does it have the hallmarks of something more dangerous? Welcome, Robert.
Bruce, thank you.
Attempts to force democracy on a country usually fail, but occasionally succeed. Will the United States and Israel's attack on Iran lead to a thriving democracy in that country?
It's unlikely, and the first thing to know is that it's not an invasion so far, it's largely air attacks. But your question is important because Mr. Trump may face the option within a week or so, or maybe more, of either having to escalate to achieve regime change, which is the stated objective, or effectively withdrawing, ending the campaign. So that in both cases, both options are full of risks for Mr. Trump domestically. Mr. Netanyahu, Israel's, America's partners in these attacks, it's very clear that he wants regime change. That's been Netanyahu's long-term position. I think Mr. Trump's objective is a little bit more vague. He certainly has referred to the awful regime, as he puts it, in Tehran, and there's no doubt about it. It's a very repressive regime. But whether that is the correct way, launching attacks against Iran is the correct way to deal with a very repressive regime which has killed thousands of protesters is arguable.
Is there anything about this Middle East conflict that means that it is more or less likely to become a wider war?
Firstly, the United States has begun the campaign against Iran with airstrikes. It should be recalled that last year Israel had a 12-day war with Iran, and the United States joined briefly in on Israel's side during that war. Israel declaimed after the war last year, that it had destroyed half of Iran's missile capabilities. And Mr. Trump said he had obliterated Iran's nuclear capabilities. However, both the United States and Israel have now claimed that there is a new threat from Iran, and that's why they had to move. But the reason I mention this is because it's related to answering your question: will it spread to a wider? It seems to me that Iran has been preparing for this possibility for a long time, and we know that virtually the entire senior leadership of Iran was eliminated within 24 hours of the airstrikes beginning, including the supreme leader of Iran. But the regime is well entrenched. It's been in power since 1979 and has been preparing for the loss of leaders in various areas. So I don't think, first of all, I don't think the quick change of regime that may be hoped for in both Tel Aviv and Washington is likely to occur. Iran has formidable stockpiles of missiles, which it's now using. And the indications are it could well affect the whole region, and it is affecting the whole region, because what is interesting is that the United States and Israel may have assumed that when they began this campaign, it would be just a question of them quickly overwhelming Iran and the rest of the world would watch them. But Iran quickly reframed the conflict. It reframed the conflict by targeting many of its regional neighbours, including the Gulf states, most of whom are US allies and most of whom have US bases on their soil. In particular, missiles and drones from Iran have targeted Qatar, Saudi Arabia. So what Iran seems to be doing is creating pressures amongst America's allies, which probably hadn't calculated or expected to be hit. And to be fair, many of them do not approve of US airstrikes on Iran, but they may be surprised by the consequences, which means that they're being targeted. Qatar in particular has very good relations with Iran and is particularly furious with Iran. So Iran is running the risk of regional isolation. At the same time, the upside of that move, if there is an upside, is that it may be creating pressures to slow down America's freedom in pursuing this campaign, because in many of these countries, their economies are now threatened. And Iran has targeted the energy infrastructure of many of these countries. And remember, many of them make their living through export of petroleum and gas. So in a sense, we do have the possibility of this spreading. And a lot depends on the next week or so. Obviously, we don't know the outcome. But I think what we do know is that Iran is well and truly militarily outgunned. It's a bit like the corner shop versus the supermarket, if you want to use a commercial analogy. Iran has a stockpile of missiles, but it's already, its navy has been decimated, its leadership has been decimated, and its ability to intercept incoming missiles has been decimated. But as we've seen in other conflicts, you can't measure a country's resistance just in terms of material capabilities. And Iran is a big country, 93 million population. The danger for the US and Israel here, particularly the longer this goes on, is that many people within Iran, they may hate the regime, but they may not like the civilian casualties that are being caused by this relentless aerial bombardment from the US and Israel, and they may rally behind the regime. So one of the ironies of this is that Mr. Trump, Mr. Netanyahu, may be resuscitating the regime when politically it seemed to be on its knees before the attacks. We don't know that's going to happen, but it is a possibility.
The United Kingdom is allowing its military bases to be used by the US to defend against retaliatory strikes by Iran. And then we think about New Zealand, which is part of the Five Eyes intelligence group, along with the UK, the US, Australia and Canada. Can we assume that we are in some way helping the US in its attacks on Iran?
I don't think we can necessarily assume that. What's been really interesting, Bruce, is to compare the New Zealand response with that of its Five Eyes partners. New Zealand, and by the way, the government's response here has come under quite a bit of criticism domestically, with the former Prime Minister Helen Clark describing it as a disgrace. And that was because the government statement here largely put the responsibility for this crisis on the shoulders of Iran. I don't think anyone's got any illusions about the authoritarian and repressive nature of the regime. What Helen Clark was complaining about was the fact that this is a clear breach of international law. Under Charter, the UN Charter, Article 51, force is permissible in self-defence, with the exception to that rule being that if it is determined that a country is about to attack you, you can use preemptive force. But in both cases, those conditions don't apply in this case. And analysts point to the fact that both the US and Israel had already inflicted serious military damage on Iran before this campaign started. So it looks like regime change is the name of the game. And if that is true, that sets a very dangerous precedent, which is a precedent that builds on the Venezuelan situation and also threats made against Canada and other countries by the Trump administration. So New Zealand's statement was criticised not because it supports the US position, but because it largely put the blame on Iran and was reluctant to say whether America's action was illegal or not. New Zealand's position, strangely, parallels that of Britain. Britain's official statement in response to the crisis does not support America's strikes, but largely puts the blame on Iran for the current situation. Now here we come to the difference within New Zealand's traditional allies. Both Australia and Canada have expressed support for Israel's and America's efforts to prevent or curb the threat that Iran presents to the region. So there's a subtle difference there. Both Australia and Canada have been more forthcoming in their support for America's operation. And note the irony here, Bruce, we spoke about Mark Carney's speech at Davos when he spoke about not giving in to great power bullying and for middle powers and all small powers to organise and create their own foreign policy path. Mr. Carney, despite the fact his own country is periodically threatened by invasion, is now apparently publicly supporting US attacks on Iran. So that's a curious situation which he'll probably have to sort out domestically in the not too distant future. So, it seems to me that some of the Five Eyes partners will be called on to provide more support than others. There's no doubt about it. It's causing tensions within the Five Eyes alliance, which consists of the US, Australia, Britain, Canada and New Zealand. So I think there's been a muted response from America's traditional partners. That doesn't mean they approve, but they're limiting their public disapproval, and with the exception of Canada and Australia, which seem to be pretty supportive. Again, that will be contingent on how long this goes on. I think Britain is doing its best to support the US, well, doing its best. Starmer initially, we have to be clear about this, none of the Five Eyes partners are involved directly in this operation. It's a US-Israeli operation. It's not supported by regional allies of the United States or Israel. So, but we, as we've seen, the case you cited in the case of the UK, we may expect, if this continues, we may get requests for further assistance if the United States finds itself ensnared in a long-running campaign, and Mr. Trump's already spoken about it could go for 4 weeks or more. We can't rule that out.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. Catch us next time on Global Insight. Noho ora mai.